Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime with the international break from hell finally over. It is now nothing but club football, proper football, Liverpool Football Club football between now and the end of the season in May or June, if you're thinking optimistically about the Champions League final. But before we think all the way that far in the future, of course, the focus tonight is on Liverpool versus Spurs at the weekend on Sunday at Anfield. It is the toughest game of the entire run-in. Certainly in terms of the league season and the fixtures we've got between now and that final game against Wolves at Anfield in the middle of May, this is going to be Liverpool's most difficult game and certainly going to be the most difficult game if we want to come away with the 3 points. And of course, with it being the first game of this mammoth run that's going to stretch through until the final day, it's so important to hit the ground running. We're coming off the back of the international break. We haven't got time now to ease our way into anything. We haven't got time to maybe pick up a good point here or there. We are still technically behind Manchester City in terms of points, so we have got to essentially win every single game. I think that's the only real way, if I'm being honest, Liverpool win the league. I think if we do win every single game, we're more likely to come away with that big shiny thing at the end of the season than we are not likely to, simply because of the fixtures Man City have got, the pile up they're facing with the Champions League and the FA Cup also coming into it, and those tough games against Spurs at home. They've got to deal with this exact fixture as well, and of course the Manchester derby even later on at Old Trafford in the season. So I think they're going to drop points somewhere, fingers crossed. And if they do, provided Liverpool win all of their games between now and the end of the season, which is of course easier said than done, we should be the ones lifting the Premier League trophy at last at Anfield on the final day. And like I said, we've got to hit the ground running. We can't afford to really be dropping points anymore. And that starts this weekend. And I think if we can win this game, then it's such a psychological boost because, like I said, it's the toughest game we've got. If we win on Sunday, the team will be looking at the rest of the games they've got this season, the rest of the teams they're going to come up against, and saying, we can beat every single one of those. So it's a massive game. And of course, with it being our first game in 2 weeks, there is that added weight as well. There's a huge load of expectation and pressure on this Liverpool side to deliver, given that it's been a while since their last game. Obviously, it was quite a difficult game as well against Fulham. So we want to see not just a result, but probably a commanding performance from the side as well. So I think it's really important that we control this game. I'm going to come on to a little bit about the tactical battle between Liverpool and Spurs a bit later on the video, but just giving a little bit of an overview, I think it's so important that we are the ones that dominate, because Spurs are good when they dominate the ball. We saw it at Anfield last season when they take control of the game, which we essentially let them do in the second half. They are pretty good, and we struggle to deal with it, whereas I think if we have them on the back foot, we'll have them where we want them. And even though that means maybe sacrificing a bit of the gegenpress and not being able to use that to our advantage as much, you know, hey-ho, I'd still back us if we dominate the ball to dominate the match and, most importantly, score more goals than they do over the course of the 90 minutes. So team news going into the game. There's been a little bit of injury stuff going on throughout the international break. There are a couple of players that are meant to be being assessed before the game. Those are Trent Alexander-Arnold and Xherdan Shaqiri, who both pulled out of international duty with injuries. At the time of those injuries, I think we were all kind of presuming that that was Jurgen Klopp, you know, having a word in the international manager's ears and saying, can we, you know, just bring him back, please? You know, you don't really need him. We kind of do. That sort of thing. The kind of tricks we've seen from plenty of big Premier League managers in the past. And it's great to see Jurgen Klopp doing it as well. But maybe the fact that they're still being touted as needing late fitness tests means there is a little bit more going on there than we originally thought. So hopefully they're both available for the game, because I think both of them will be huge assets. And I'll come on to White a little bit later on the video. In terms of other players who may or may not be available for the game, unfortunately this one does come just a tiny bit too soon for Joe Gomez and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. Both of them were being mooted as making their big returns, if not in this fixture, then certainly around it. I think even though, you know, they might be ready to play, I don't think this is really the game to play them in. I think we should maybe be looking a little bit more at like the fixture coming up against Southampton in about a week's time, maybe even the Champions League fixtures against Porto, and thinking that's where we can start to draft them in, get them a few substitute appearances so they are absolutely ready and firing for that final push in the last couple of games of the season. So unfortunately they're not going to be available. I think Jurgen Klopp was a little bit rueful about the hype he's brought around Oxlade-Chamberlain, because he'd spent a lot of time saying how well he was getting on and how well he's been training, but he sort of said in his press conference that he's still been feeling the odd little twinge here and there. He's not quite fully fit, and he is occasionally going to suffer, you know, not necessarily setbacks because they're kind of expected, but moments where we kind of get a reality check in terms of just how close he is to actually being able to play full throttle football for the first team in what is guaranteed to be an incredibly intense run-in. So unfortunately, no Ox or Joe Gomez at the weekend, but we're expecting to see a little more from them fairly soon. So as for how Liverpool are actually going to line up for this game, or at least how I think they're going to line up for this game, it is of course always impossible to predict what is going on in a man like Jurgen Klopp's mind, but I'm going to have a go anyway. In goal, it's obviously going to be Alisson Becker. I think we all know what that one's going to be. The centre-back pairing, I think we probably stick with Joel Matip and Virgil van Dijk. I think even if Gomez had been available, we'd stay with that, because while I'm not the biggest Matip fan, and, you know, the way he plays kind of gets on my nerves sometimes, and I felt a little bit vindicated by some of the things he's done in recent weeks, such as just, you know, putting it into his own net against Bayern Munich, doing the same against Manchester United. Thank God that was offside. So he's not the ideal centre-back in my eyes, but he hasn't been totally calamitous either, so I think he certainly retains his place. Dejan Lovren should be available for this game. You know, he's pretty much come back from his injury, at least word on the street, I guess you can call it, is that he is now back and available for Liverpool again. But like I said, Joel Matip hasn't committed too many atrocities to, you know, legitimise him being dumped out the team for a potentially half-fit Dejan Lovren. I think he's another player like Joe Gomez who will be slowly ushered in over the coming weeks. So I think Matip and Virgil van Dijk are your centre-back pairing. Either side of them, of course, you're going to have Andrew Robertson out on the left. And I reckon Trent's probably fine, because he's been playing through these issues for a while now, and while that's not necessarily a good thing, we saw what happened in the Brighton game when he tries to play through an injury, because obviously he loves the club, he loves playing football, he's never going to want to give up that starting spot, so he will do anything to get out on the pitch, even if it does mean playing through the pain barrier and potentially injuring himself a little bit for upcoming fixtures. I think with it being Southampton next week, we can probably afford to give him a little bit of a rest and say, you know what, Trent, burn yourself out this weekend in the really, really big game, and then we'll play Milner or Henderson or Camacho or anybody else in that right-back slot for the Southampton game. So I think Trent absolutely has to start in this game. The midfield three is a really, really difficult one to call. I think the hardest call that Jurgen Klopp is going to have to make, simply because of the options available to him and the key decisions he's going to have to make in terms of what players he picks. I think nailed on starters are probably both Fabinho and Wijnaldum. You know, Fabinho is just so crucial to this Liverpool team at this time, and I think he'll be hugely important in terms of screening the defence if need be against this Spurs side, but also if they do choose to be pragmatic and put players behind the ball and try and frustrate us, having a deep line playmaker like Fabinho can be so important. We saw it against Man U at Anfield earlier on the season. He can play the kind of balls that can unlock a frustrating defence, so he's so important. He has to play. And then Wijnaldum as well, I think, is just going to be imperative, because these are the kind of games he plays best in. You know, at times you can accuse him of disappearing in away games against lesser opposition, but home games against teams that are as good, if maybe in the case of Spurs, a little bit worse than us, but let's not even go there for now. But in those kind of games, he absolutely flourishes. He thrives in this environment, you know, taking the ball, moving it on, being quick, pressing, passing well, doing the basics when you need to. You need a player like that in your midfield for a game like this. So I think those two are nailed on. It's the other berth in that midfield three that Jurgen Klopp has really got to think about, because I think what it comes down to is whether or not he wants an extra creative player in there, because we've seen in games like against United and Everton, if you play three sort of more defensive-minded than attacking-minded midfielders in terms of Fabinho, Henderson and Wijnaldum, we do stagnate a little bit going forward, and I can understand why Klopp did that in an away game, but at a home game, I think he's got to kind of bite the bullet and take a chance, you know, throw his cards down on the table or whatever the saying is, and play someone who's actually going to take the fight to Tottenham a little bit more. I think that's probably either going to be Keita or Lallana. It's a tough call, because obviously Lallana's played more football recently, but I think Keita is the perfect player because he's also got that pressing intensity. He's perfect for this kind of game. It's just a matter of whether or not Jurgen Klopp thinks he's ready. The fact that he played a brilliant game against Bayern earlier on in February, to me suggests that, you know, Jurgen Klopp can trust him. If Jurgen Klopp sends him out and says, just do what you did against Bayern Munich a couple months ago, then we will be absolutely fine. But it's, like I said, it's a tough one to call, because we don't know what's going on behind the scenes in training. Obviously, Lallana hasn't played any internationals. I'm not sure about Keita, to be perfectly honest. He might have played a few games. If he has, Guinea is quite far away. And as we've seen in the past, when he's played internationals, he hasn't always been playing on the best of pitches, so he could not be in perfect condition. So that is something to think about. Personally, I'd like to see Keita. I can see Jurgen Klopp going with Alana, but to be honest, I haven't got a clue because I'm not in the training sessions. So that is certainly one to keep an eye for going into the game, because I think that will make a huge difference to how this side sets up. I think if he goes for Henderson, which again I can see happening because Henderson is a fantastic player and does play well in these types of games, but plays better in a more deep-lying role in these types of games, then I'd be a little bit worried if he does that, simply because I'd be concerned as to where the creativity is going to come from, especially if, like I said, Spurs do set up to frustrate us. So do keep an eye on the midfield lineup when it's announced for the game, because, like I said, that will certainly give us a huge idea of how Jurgen Klopp wants Liverpool to play for this game. And then the front three, it's obvious. It's Mane, it's Firmino, it's Salah. You can't really do anything else for a game like this. I think you go with the old-fashioned front three. Don't do anything like putting Salah down the middle, because I think it's interesting with Mo Salah, even though there's been all this talk of him being out of form, I think he's actually played some pretty good football recently. It's just that he hasn't found the net. But when Mane's in the scoring form he's in, that's not really a problem. You know, if Salah goes from, you know, goal scorer to provider, then that's absolutely fine as long as someone is on the end of his passes to put the ball in the back of the net. And as of now, it's looking like that is the case. So I would kind of back him to break his duck in this game. I think this is the right kind of game for him to make a statement, and I think he will, pardon me, get the space that he needs to get a goal. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is the game where Mo Salah finally gets himself back on the score sheet. But if he doesn't, I'd still expect a big performance and a game-changing performance from him. So taking a little look at Spurs then, obviously they have also felt a little bit of a toll from the international break. A key absentee for this game is going to be Eric Dyer, who was injured on England duty. He's out for a couple of weeks, so that completely, definitely 100% rules him out for the game against Liverpool. There are, of course, going to be other players in there who are going to be a little bit fatigued from the international games. I'm pretty sure Spurs players tend to fly more miles than anybody, simply because they just, almost by coincidence, have loads and loads of internationals in that side, especially crucial players in the national side as well. Harry Kane played a lot of minutes and obviously will have had to, you know, give his all for the England team. Kieran Trippier will be the same. Dele Alli will be the same. So that's certainly something that I think they're going to be wary of, and I think will factor into maybe not their team selection, because players like Kane are nailed on to start, but will certainly factor into how they try and approach this game to get around the fact that some of their players will almost definitely not be 100% fit. In terms of how I think they're going to play, like form-wise and performance-wise, it's a really tough one to call, because obviously it's after the international break. It's been a long time since their last game, even longer than it has been since Liverpool's game, because of the way the FA Cup kind of interferes with the fixture list. They actually haven't played as Spurs for 3 weeks, which is an incredibly long time in football to not play as a unit. You know, certainly being a Liverpool supporter, we all know how important rhythm is, even though it can affect players like fatigue levels. It's great to be playing weekend, midweek, because the players just kind of develop an almost telepathic connection, and the fact they've all gone their separate ways on the internationals does always seem to interrupt that. And I don't think this game will get going like straight away. I think it'll take like 15 or 20 minutes for either team to kind of feel their way in and start creating chances and work out what the balance of power is going to be. But like I said, it's difficult to call with the form, because they were poor before the international break. They had lost like 5 or 6 away games on the spin in all competitions or something like that. Certainly quite a few in the Premier League. Aside from that, when they got in Dortmund, they've been really poor on the road. Not that good at home either. I think they lost 3 of their last 4 games, isn't it? Against Chelsea, Spurs and Burnley. And the other game they drew against Arsenal at home, and they relied on a last-minute penalty save from Hugo Lloris to get them out of jail there and avoid getting a loss there as well. So they are in a really sticky patch, and it's at both ends of the pitch that they've been struggling. Surprisingly, since Kane's come back in, they've just not been able to score so many goals. They've certainly struggled with chance creation, which maybe says a little bit about how Kane affects them, how they struggle to maybe attack as a unit when they've got one player who is essentially just functioning as a target man. And when he does drop deep, if you ask me, doesn't play that well and is actually less influential when he tries to get a little bit more involved in the build-up play. Defensively as well, they've looked a little bit shambolic. The organisation seems to have gone over the last few weeks. They've conceded some silly goals, some sloppy goals, some easy goals. So it hasn't really been plain sailing for Spurs at the moment, and I think The touchline ban from Mauricio Pochettino, he will of course be watching this game from the stands, is also going to have an effect, because if there's one thing you can say for him, aside from the fact that he manages a team really well and kind of gives them a really strong, effective attacking style of play to work with, he can also be incredibly pragmatic as well. He can come to a ground like Anfield and change the way his team plays just to implement a specific game plan to try and get a result, and that's what I mean about Spurs potentially trying to frustrate us. I can see Pochettino saying, actually, you know what, lads, don't go gung-ho, sit back and then try and hit them on the break, and Harry Kane will therefore simply function as the target man who gets on the end of those counter-attacks and stuff like that. So we've got to be very, very wary of that. But I think something they will struggle with is game management, because like I said, as players are going to have to feel their way into this game, they're going to have to kind of find their rhythm, and substitutions are going to be made in the second half as well and stuff like that. The rhythm of the game is going to change, the balance of power is going to shift, and we saw what happened in Spurs' loss against Southampton, where they started really brightly, they were clicking going forward as well, and if it wasn't for Harry Kane having a bit of an off day in front of goal, surprisingly, they probably could have been 3-0 up in the first half, and yet in the second half, Southampton came out all guns blazing. They took the fight to Tottenham, and it was a totally different game, and they didn't really seem to have any idea how to cope with that. And I think it's no surprise that Pochettino was in the stands for that game and therefore couldn't influence it on the touchline. So I wouldn't be worried if things didn't go our way for the first half hour or so, because I think as we feel our way into the game, as we kind of work Tottenham out, they're going to struggle to find any way to counteract that, because they won't have a pragmatic football manager like Pochettino on the touchline to make the decisions in the heat of the moment, make the split-second calls that a top-level football manager can make, and actually influence the game in their favour in that way. So I think that's going to play a huge part, and obviously patience is always going to be key in a game like this, because a lot has been made about emotion affecting these Liverpool players. So many people, mainly ex-Manchester City and currently Manchester City players, surprisingly or not so surprisingly, depending on how you see it, I certainly see it as the latter way, have all been talking about how Liverpool's downfall is the emotion and the players getting swept up in the kind of the roar of the crowd. And I'll be honest, I don't really believe in that. I think it's absolutely a good thing that the crowd drive these players on. We saw it in Europe last season, what can happen when the players and the crowd are almost as one in terms of how they take the fight to the opposition. However, I do think it's important for a game like this that we avoid the kind of thing that happened against Chelsea 5 years ago, where we came unstuck because the players kind of almost overdid it. They went chasing a win they didn't need, and that was what caused us problems. So the players are going to have to be pragmatic. They're going to have to manage their way through the game. But if anything, that doesn't stress me out at all, because this Liverpool side, more than any other Liverpool side I've seen, is absolutely fantastic at managing games like that all the way through the 90 minutes. And somehow, whether they're brilliant or whether they're having an off day, getting the result. And especially with this being after the international break as well, that kind of game management is going to be so important, because like I said, at times the flow just isn't going to be there. But all things considered, you know, it's a fantastic game. It's a great way to come back after the international break to get us all as excited as we possibly can be for the title race, for what is going to be an absolutely incredible run-in to watch as a Liverpool fan. I reckon we're going to get the win at the weekend. I don't think it's going to be a crushing. I'd love it if it was, but I do feel like the rhythm's not going to quite be there yet. But I can certainly see us getting a 2-1, maybe a 3-1, maybe a 2-0. But either way, I think it's going to be 3 points to Liverpool. Let me know what you think is going to happen down in the comments below. Apart from that, thank you guys very, very much for watching this video. I'm sorry I've been gone for so long, but of course, the international break, it's kind of hard to make content when absolutely nothing has happened Liverpool related. But of course, I'm going to be back with plenty of stuff between now and the end of the season. So don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days as well. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back on Sunday evening after we've hopefully smashed Spurs to stay at the top of the Premier League table. Until then, bye for now.